Hello, I'm King Link, and welcome to King Link Can't Come Up with a Better Name for His Reviews, also known as the April 2020 Reviews. Back in February, I threw out a few reviews of games I was playing. I've played more games, so I think we'll be doing this again. I'm mostly going to be talking about games that are major enough to be worthy of discussion or spoke to me in some way, just something I want to talk about. So playing something simple like Pleasure Portrait Puzzle just doesn't make this list. Most of these games I've played to completion. I just want to give my feelings on them, and I have a couple deep dives already for 2 of these videos, and I will be planning at least one more in the near future. But for now, let's just talk about what I've played recently. On screen right now is Return of the OberDinn. It's the newest game from Lucas Pope, whose other major game was Papers, Please. This game is all about discovering what happened on a ghost ship. Everyone is missing, and it's up to you to explore flashbacks of major moments of the ship. Return of the OberDinn is a solid puzzle game which uses backtracking and a lot of recontextualizing clues well. I love the ability to know pieces of people's identity but not have their actual name, which is all the game's going to care about. There's clever moments in the puzzle, and the story is extremely good. Opening up a new part of the ship or solving a major character is some of the strongest moments in the game. The problem with Return of the OberDinn is that, while 60% of the crew is easy to discover, 20% is a solid but interesting struggle that absolutely feels rewarding, and those are the best moments. The remaining 20% of the crew, though, usually involves guesswork. At least that's what a lot of people advise. There are clues for these people, but most of those clues are the size of like a key in a level that's multiple rooms wide, and you probably won't understand the meaning of those clues unless you're thinking specifically of that solution. They can be anything from like who is standing next to each other in one scene, or the type of sock that someone's wearing in a hammock. Is Return of the OberDinn a bad game? Not really. But it's not a great game, which is what fans of Paper Please probably expected and should have. If I was to score it, I'd probably give this only a 3 out of 5. I did like it more than I hated it, but I think there's a lot that could have been done better, and I loved Papers, Please, so I feel like this is a step back for Lucas Pope. Next up is Resident Evil 7, and I'm going to be honest, I did not expect to like Resident Evil 7. I was prepared to put it aside pretty quickly. In fact, I dislike horror in general. I'm just not a fan of that genre. I abhor Amnesia, especially, which is an absolutely terrifying game you should check out. And yet, I somehow beat Resident Evil 7 and had a great time with it. As I played Resident Evil 7, I had one thought that kept coming to my mind. This is effective horror. And those words have been in my head almost the entire time of playing Resident Evil 7, and even after that point, I've considered doing a video on what I mean. Essentially, there are only 7 enemies I count in Resident Evil 7. Maybe that's why it is called Resident Evil 7. The thing is, each of those 7 enemies include the bosses, and those 7 enemies are so skilled at harassing the player that they become better than what you expect from a horror game. Resident Evil 7 made me impressed by how well it does horror, and how you don't need horrific monsters or scenes to drive home this horror. Spending the majority of the game low on ammo made the game feel intense without relying on constant combat, and Resident Evil 7 focuses on the deeply unsettling nature of the situation that a player doesn't want to be in. I personally would recommend Resident Evil 7 to almost anyone. If you like horror, you're gonna enjoy this game, obviously. But if you're like me and you avoid that horror genre for whatever reason, I think Resident Evil 7 could be your exception. The thing is, Resident Evil is a great horror action franchise. We know it's made a few missteps, 5 and 6, but the thing is, Resident Evil 7 brought it all back to that amazing franchise that has stood the test of time so far. A Short Hike was not a game I was expecting to really enjoy, but it turned out to be amazing. I didn't know much about it, so I actually thought this would be something similar to Firewatch, but instead, A Short Hike is like an amusement park. There's just so many little things you can experience as you explore this world. I recently did a video about exploration and what Outer Wilds does right, but A Short Hike checks all those same boxes off. You have a decent sized map, not enormous but not too small, a ton to discover, especially with finding and experiencing all these little elements. This can be anything from finding an additional item that has a few trinkets on it, to a secret path that you can only discover with a pickaxe. There's special feathers that allow you to do a version of double jump, and more. The characters here are exciting to meet, the mini quests you run into are quite solid, and the experience is one that you're going to cherish. It's not a deep story, but it's a game where the journey is the most important part, and if you get sidetracked easily in games, you're probably going to have a great time. The only issue I have with this game is it is about 2 hours long, at least that's what I played, but it only costs $8 and there's a decent amount of replayability to see it all. I don't have a real problem with that. I recommend it, but this is an exploration game. Trying to do anything outside of exploration won't be as enjoyable, and the main path is short, but you will probably find yourself being drawn to all the other pieces of the game, which is the best parts here. Doom Eternal. Well, I just released a video on Doom Eternal looking at its game design, and I had a lot to talk about. Doom Eternal is Doom 2016's bigger, badder brother. Where Doom was in the military going to war, Doom Eternal is just in a gang ready to throw down and kick some ass at any moment. Doom Eternal is all about taking everything from Doom 2016 to the extreme. More enemies, faster attacks, more intense moments. The combat here really doesn't let up until you've destroyed all the monsters in the room, and the game is a non-stop roller coaster ride. But at the same time, as I brought up in that previous video, there's stuff that I'm not a fan of. I think there's too much of an attempt for a story, the overwhelming enemies would be a great finale for the game, but the huge waves appear too often and too early and become the only style of combat that Doom Eternal offers. And yeah, I don't like the Marauder as a general enemy. After my last video, I saw a lot of people showing how easy they are to beat, but they're using top tier techniques to take them out, and the fact that they're devoting the entire strategy to how to play the game with dealing with a single enemy is the problem that I have with that one monster. The thing is, Doom Eternal is between a good and a great game, and I get it, I enjoyed the hell out of it. I had a lot of fun with Doom Eternal, but if I had to choose, I personally would prefer playing Doom 2016 again instead of playing Doom Eternal a second time. I find Doom 2016 to be almost perfect. At the same time, I still recommend Doom Eternal. I think it's really fun, but it's not the best game out there. Yoku's Island Express. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect from this game. I've heard it talked about quite a few times as a Metroidvania, but what I actually found was an amazing pinball game mixed with a pretty good Metroidvania platformer. I'm a fan of pinball, and Yoku's Island Express is a really interesting and accessible pinball game dressed up as an adventure of a dung beetle trying to be a postman. It has a great look and style to the entire game, as well as a pretty good journey. The main character looks like a dung beetle when they're moving around as a platformer, but watching the same dung beetle flop around as he flies around the pinball sections is hilarious. Now, the downside is everything relating to the Metroid style in Yoku's Island Express. The game is really interesting with its typical lack of a jump button, but when you use that same system for traversing, for trying to collect collectibles, backtracking to get them, it's just weak. There's a lot of collectibles in Yoku's Island Express, which I enjoyed trying to hunt down, but when I'm trying to backtrack, it's a terrible situation for this game. There's also a bit of a lack of difficulty where the player can't actually die and only gives up a minor amount of currency when they lose their ball. Still, I enjoyed Yoku's Island Express. It's a great pinball style and a fun adventure outside of that. If you think you can handle a pinball-based game, you're probably going to have a ton of fun here. If you want a perfect Metroidvania, you're going to be disappointed. There's just not enough here. Though, hang on, I do have a true Metroidvania coming up, and it is amazing. Planet Zoo, another game I've already done a video on, but I love talking about this one. As I said in that video, I'm a zoo aficionado, and I really love my local zoo, but you know, we're stuck in the house right now, so while I do get video feeds from many zoos, Oregon Zoo, Cincinnati Zoo, and of course my very own San Diego Zoo and Safari Park, I am missing out on the animals themselves. So when I do miss them, I end up playing Planet Zoo and making my own zoos in this game. Honestly, Planet Zoo is very fun. It's very similar to Planet Coaster in that there's a ton to do here. There's a solid story mode with a lot of great characters, a franchise mode that's online enabled, and a ton of animals to see and watch and interact with. The downside of Planet Zoo, though, is that the interface can be a bit terrible at times. There's always a screen or two that I'm looking for and I can't find in the game, or functionality, such as being able to take a single type of animal and pin that's what you're working on. So when you're getting habitat ready for an animal, I want to know if that selected habitat is big enough for a lion without having to put lions into it. Then I want to get toys for the lion without having to select the lion from that list again. This isn't really automation I'm talking about, but there's just a few things like this that I want to do that the game should anticipate the player's desires. However, overall, Planet Zoo is extremely fun. I've loved my time with it. My daughter plays it too, and that's a rare thing. But as my video proved, it doesn't technically compare to a real zoo. I'm going to link that video at the end if you want to see real animals. And well, there was a gorilla who did something a little bit funny that was my favorite moment possibly ever from the zoo, so I'd recommend that video. But Planet Zoo is amazing. I recommend this game quite a bit. Berserk and the Band of the Hawk. This is a Dynasty Warrior game, but it's based in the world of Berserk. Back in college, I was an anime fan, and one of my favorite animes was Berserk. This is a pretty faithful adaptation of it. Berserk and the Band of the Hawks follows the main character of Guts on his adventure. The game, though, makes me realize how different Berserk is in its tone. The first half of the game focuses on the Band of Hawks, and it's a very Dynasty Warrior-esque game with a focus on knights and mercenaries and heraldry and all that. There's a few odd moments, though, but the cutscenes are taken straight from the OVAs, and it looks beautiful. Sadly, the cutscenes here run out about the time of the eclipse, if you know what I mean. If not... Alright, so this is a major spoiler I'm going to avoid, but it's a turning point of the series. It's also about when the OVAs stop. At the same time, this is when the game starts to go downhill. After the eclipse, the story starts to focus on demons, as fans of the manga will know. This is a very tonally different part of the game, but works well, even if it is a darker turn for it. The problem is the quality also dips here, and there's just so many levels, which is what you might expect from a Dynasty Warrior game. But the thing is, the first half of this game feels extremely well paced. The second half of the game is very grindy, and you probably could have had half the levels in that second half and still been an enjoyable game. I beat the game in about 30 hours. There's an endless eclipse mode as well that has even more content that I dived into. I mean, there's a lot here, as you would expect from a Dynasty Warrior game, of course. If you're a fan of the hack and slash genre, especially Dynasty Warriors, or love the Berserk anime in general, there's no question you should probably play this game. But if you aren't well versed in the Berserk anime or know who many of these characters are, I don't know if it's going to be as good. Unlike Dynasty Warriors, though, there's a reason that Guts from Berserk can kill thousands of enemies before him. He's a total badass. Little Nightmares. Honestly, this is the one game this month I didn't finish, and I'm torn on covering it, but I think I will. This is a dark platformer, and it reminds me entirely too much of Limbo, to not mention the comparison. Though, this is a game that's in 3 dimensions, where Limbo was in a 2-dimensional plane, a side-scroller. The art here looks good, and everything is really detailed. I'm going to be showing the first of the major enemies here, and while this looks okay, it's also the second time you've seen this character, and you see exactly what this character looks like. Really, the horror in this game is pretty blatant like that. I've played about half the game and stopped when the game got into a position where I started to have to guess what the game wanted me to do quite often. I know people love this style, but to me, the art here is more gross than a true horror. The fact you can see everything about the enemies so well takes the fear out of the game for me. I didn't really enjoy this game, so it's not for me, but I'm sure there's an audience for this one. I'm just not particularly fond of it. Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I gave Ori and the Blind Forest a perfect score when I started my site. I think it was the first game I awarded that score to, and of course I had to try the sequel and see if it was as good as the original. The good news is that Ori and the Will of the Wisps is even better. Everything I loved about that original Ori game has been improved, and that's true even as the entire game has been changed. The high difficulty and strange save system of the original game is gone, and instead you have a typical but interesting Metroidvania and a better way for abilities to be utilized. The biggest change is the addition of a major story throughout the entire game, and while the original game had possibly the most beautiful and moving opening scene of any game I've ever played, Ori and the Will of the Wisps tells a better and more interesting story throughout the entire game instead of just that one opening scene. This doesn't always feel like a direct sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest with all the changes they've made, but that only enhances Ori and the Will of the Wisps because it's so different and unique it can surpass Ori and the Blind Forest in a way that a simple sequel would have been held back by design decisions from that first game. I think Ori and the Blind Forest may have been more graphically pleasing, but Will of the Wisp is probably my favorite out of these 2 games. And this is an absolute must-play for any fan of platformers or Metroidvanias. Finally, we come to, well, I did my humble choice video recently and I awarded Hitman 2 the best game of the month, and I said I'd probably play it. 50 hours later, I'm still playing Hitman 2, and that's a testament to how solid this game is. Hitman 2 continues the same sort of quasi-puzzle system where Agent 47 has to figure out how to take out his targets. Most levels have a lot of life and vibrance to the world itself, and a ton of minor pieces you can interact with, disguise yourself with, or even manipulate, from objects to the guards to just normal people. If you were to just play Hitman 2 and kill every target, you might be able to beat the game in under 10 hours, but Hitman 2 expects you to replay levels multiple times, learning the best approaches, attacking targets in different ways, and even playing out the minor stories found in each environment. It's not just a way to pad out the runtime, it's a system that players will want to chase. You know, I have a lot more that I want to say about Hitman 2, but I don't want to focus this entire video on it. So I'll just say I recommend this game at this point, and if you're interested in hearing more about why, come back next week when I'll be putting out a new video specifically on the game design of Hitman 2 and dive into why this game works so well. It's going to be my third video this month where I talk about Hitman 2, so I guess technically let's call this Hitman month for me. If you do want Hitman 2 though, and it is still April 2020, check out the Humble choice as well, you can get it cheap there. So those are the big games I played this month. Other games that I've touched on but I haven't talked about for some reason are Lul Inferno, it's a bit too small to cover, Mortal Kombat 11, which I'll probably talk about when I get a chance to dive deeper into it, Jackbox Party Pack, which I played with the family, it's super fun stuff, all of them, Runner 3, haven't finished that yet, and it's merely okay, Gris, which I played more of, pretty solid, and Animal Crossing, which is a great game, but I don't want to deal with Nintendo and their copyright bullshit. So with that all said, let's name the best and the worst game of the month. The worst game of this month is the one that I didn't finish, and I still felt like I had to talk about. Little Nightmares. This is not a very fun game for me, and I just didn't have a great time with it. Maybe it's a taste thing, but to me, this game was not interesting. The best of the month though, well, we have a few really solid games with Planet Zoo and Hitman 2 on the deck. Either of those could have been the best of almost any other month, but for me, it's all about Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I want to call out that this is an exceptional, not just for being a follow-up to a great game, but elevating the entire series to a new height. Honestly, Ori and the Will of the Wisps isn't just great for this month, it's an instant contender for me for the game of the year so far, which is still early, but man, what a game. Now that's what I think about the games I've played recently. Honestly, it's been a pretty good month. This is more of a vanity project video for me at this point, or at least a way that I can start thinking about the best games I've played all year, and a way for you to check out what I've been playing that has been good or bad enough to make this list. And if you've enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and ringing that bell. It will really help out the channel and I'd appreciate that. Now if you've enjoyed my thoughts on these games, why don't you take a look where I go a little bit deeper. I have a video here on Doom Eternal that goes into what changed between the original game and its sequel, as well as a video on the Planet Zoo, a little bit of an April Fool's joke, but just a comparison between Planet Zoo and the San Diego Zoo. And until then, I'm King Link, and thank you for watching.